The top 3 or 4 requests or challenges that families come to us wanting help with are finding a reliable and affordable in-home care aide to come into the home, finding a affordable elder care attorney, ideally one who does free consultations, who can help the family secure the power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and other documentation that families need in order to manage their loved ones' affairs. And then number 3 is moving or finding a right senior community for a loved one. And we often have families requesting our help finding a great senior community that accepts Medicaid as a form of payment because that's a rarity. And then the fourth usually has something to do with the emotional aspect of caregiving.
Hi, how are you, Alyse? How has your morning been?
Great. So far, so good. Pretty productive. Yeah. What about you?
It has been great. I am loving the weather now.
I
Thankfully,
know,
it's
right?
sunny and after a really long time, so I'm really rejoicing that it's back.
I am equally excited.
So, Elise, it's so good to see you again. I am so inspired by the work that you're doing at CareCopilot. It is a great example of a founder who has built a company based on her personal experience. And elder care is also relevant today because in the US, the number of elders is increasing at a very, I would say, rapid pace. And I see elders around me all the time. So I just feel like, it's more relevant than ever. In fact, over the past year, both me and my friends have been starting to research elder care options for our parents, for our loved ones, in India and the US. So I am very excited to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm obviously excited to talk more about CareCopilot.
So Elise, tell me, what do you do at CareCopilot?
Yeah, absolutely. So, CareCopilot's mission is to take the stress out of taking care of aging loved ones. And we do that by pairing people who are taking care of aging loved ones, like older parents or spouses, with local human experts who help with everything from interviewing in-home care aides to researching senior communities to applying for caregiver grants and more. And we provide this service at a low, flat monthly rate for families to again help take some of the stress out of that whole process.
What led you to build CareCopilot?
Yeah. So my sister and I have one sister, took care of both of our aging parents, one right after the other for a total of 8 years before they both passed away.
Right.
Our dad died of complications from multiple sclerosis, and our mom died of Alzheimer's. And in the course of those 8 years, we never found anything that really tangibly improved our experience as caregivers in any measurable way. We just never found a solution. And then our parents died. And that never sat well with me. So I left my job as a senior software engineer at Venmo in order to build a solution that could make sure that the experience of caring for aging loved ones is easier for other families than it was for us.
Right. So, when you left Venmo, right? This is when you had a secure job. Also, I remember you telling me that when your father passed away, you were very you realized that you could have done better financially, right? And so, how did you sort of plan your career post your father's passing? And then also, how did you, when you were at Venmo, how did you take a plunge to really start Care Copilot? Because I'm sure that there must be this feeling that, hey, I need to get started. Hey, I need to get started because it's something that's coming out of a personal example. And so, how did you? Because there are like so many, and I specifically asked this because constantly on Women Who Build, I get questions from listeners. Hey, all this is great. I have an idea that I really want to work on, but I just don't know if I'm financially ready. And specifically so for New York City, given that it's so expensive. So how does one really go about thinking through all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will give an answer that I know is going to be unpopular, but I think it's the real answer, which is when it comes to taking the plunge in any big area of life, whether you're starting a business, having a child, making a big career transition, there is no right time. There is no perfect time. And there is no way you can only financially prepare so much before you just have to pull the band-aid off and take the plunge. I definitely know founders who are sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars of personal savings who have not taken the plunge because they don't have enough. And other founders who had $5,000 in the bank took a leap of faith and then they managed to go out and raise $1.5 million. True story. And so that's the best answer I have for that. There is no magic number, and preparing for taking that next step, it just varies so much by one's financial situation and how many, if any, loved ones are relying on you, that I don't think I can give a one size fits all answer to that. One anecdote that I can share, though, from my own experience is that for me and a lot of other people who I know who did take this plunge, there was a certain amount of luck involved in it.
Hmm.
So, and this sort of goes to your earlier questions as well about financially planning to take care of aging loved ones. To walk you through a short time frame, my father passed away the first week of November in 2014. And before he died, my mom was already starting to deteriorate. So I knew that my sister and I were shortly going to have to take care of her. And so dad died first week of November 2014. Last week of November 2014, I wrote my first line of code because I knew that I wanted to transition into a career in software engineering so that
How
I
old
could
were
have more
you?
time and money to support my mom.
How old were you then?
I think I was 27, 28. Yeah.
Right. Wow.
And so I made that transition. And it's a good thing that I did because mom deteriorated from Alzheimer's pretty quickly thereafter. And then she passed away in March of 2020 at the peak of the pandemic. At the time, I was working for Venmo. Venmo was owned by PayPal. And here's where the luck comes in. Because again, Venmo was owned by PayPal. And with the pandemic underway, PayPal's stock price literally tripled overnight.
Right.
And I had a lot of it. So I cashed that out, and that's what I used in order to create a little bit of a nest egg in order to move forward and make this happen. But I also got lucky twice because I took a chance and applied for a little bit of venture capital before I left Venmo. And so 3 hours after I turned in my laptop, they also called me to confirm that they wanted to write me my first $25,000 check. So admittedly, I got lucky, but luck is also funny because I feel like you kind of make your own luck. I had already committed to
Yeah.
leaving Venmo before I got the call. So that's how it worked out for me.
Yeah. Just yesterday, I was having this conversation with someone who moved from India to the US without anything. And she has made a name for herself in the media world. And she said that, I got lucky. But my mentors always say that you worked really hard to build that luck. You took care of the timing. You made the right moves for you to be able to, reap the benefits of the luck that you already created for yourself. So that I found really powerful. And I'm sure that was also true in your case since you had already applied for venture capital, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the words of an investor who I spoke with a couple years ago. She used the expression increasing your luck surface area. And
Right.
that's something that's always stuck with me. Luck plays a big part of it, but putting yourself out there, applying for things that you in no way feel qualified for, it's a way to help facilitate the luck that comes to you.
Absolutely. I agree. So just talking about the eldercare market, and it has long been tapped into. For example, a place for mom has been around for long. What does the market really look like today, and how many companies already exist, and where do the opportunities really lie?
Yeah, so it's a little hard for me to pinpoint how many companies exist in the market at large, just
Right.
because, hard to have that level of insight. But in terms of the market as a whole, what I'm seeing is as follows. So, when it comes to the elder care market, we are at a point of sophistication in the market where we have a lot of admittedly very good, what I would call point solutions. So, a place for mom is a really good solution specifically for finding a senior community for a loved one.
Right.
There's also care.com, which is a specific point solution for finding an in-home care aide to come into the home and care for mom and dad. Silver Bills helps with the finances. And so we have a lot of great point solutions in the market. But one thing that I'm seeing a lack of, and of course I'm biased given my solution, is solutions that are more comprehensive
Right.
that can help families with both the medical and non-medical aspects of caregiving with a single app or a single service. There's so much complexity to taking care of an adult loved one. It's so much more than just finding the right nursing home or finding a great in-home care aide. There's legal, financial, and other aspects. And so that's what I'm still seeing a dearth of in the market. Starting to see a few players like myself come into that with some comprehensive solutions. But honestly, I would love to see more competition because I know that that's what families really want.
Right. So is this like CareCopilot has a website, right? Or do you also have an app right now?
It's funny that you asked because CareCopilot is a little over 2 years old now.
Right.
And when I first started CareCopilot, we did have a self-service app for families where they could find vetted and highly rated elder care attorneys and senior communities and more. And that had mild success. But what we found is that when families are navigating the care of an aging loved one, something that's so intimate and so high stakes, they don't really want to self-serve. A
Mm,
lot of families still want to speak with a human.
right.
And so we effectively deprecated that app and then moved into providing these direct one-on-one services where we work with families directly, again, for a flat monthly rate.
Right. Got it. And so are these, I'm increasingly seeing that, in areas that actually serve the elderly, right? There are multiple apps that are making use of the fact that, I mean, of course, they need in-person care, they need in-person help. Say, for example, someone, calls up the Uber driver and coordinates where to pick this elder person from, right? But what happens in that case is that this person, this human personnel who actually gives the call to an Uber driver, is maybe based in the Philippines or in some different country. So, what is sort of like the innovation that can come about in a model like yours, which is really not only digital, but kind of like phygital? I don't know if this is a good word for it, but it requires some human intervention as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is always an interesting one for me. And it's one that I admittedly argue with investors about a lot because they
Yeah.
don't really love this dynamic. When it comes to elder care, the resources that are the most value adding and the most needed for families are highly localized and highly humanized.
Right.
You need an elder care attorney who practices in your state. You need an in-home care aide who will travel to your zip code.
Hmm.
And technology can be used to help facilitate those connections. But ultimately, it's just very localized and there's no getting around that human element. And I've seen, admittedly, some companies in this space fail because they tried to eliminate the human aspect for the sake of scale to the detriment of providing families what they really needed. And
Right.
so my thesis is that in order to succeed in this state, succeed in this space as a business and provide the very best services to families, you have to do this really delicate dance of automating and digitizing the pieces that can be automated, like communication, but making sure that the humans are still available to provide that in-person work with that compassion and care that's needed.
Right. So would you call yourself, I also see that there's a longitudinal kind of a service for a caregiver here at CareCopilot. would you also say that you are kind of like a marketplace that's enabling them with a human touch, or like how does that work?
So I can see how some people might use the word marketplace when they think of CareCopilot, but I don't think that's quite accurate when it comes to what I'm doing. I would say that the a more accurate analog might be a concierge or a personal assistant.
Right.
So, for example, you lead a busy life as a professional, maybe you hire a personal assistant to pick up your dry cleaning and get your groceries and pick up your shoes from the cobbler. There's a lot of other professionals that you need to connect with in order to get everything done. But you have that one point person who's acting as a sort of concierge, project manager, whatever you call them, to connect you.
Right.
So with that in mind, that's effectively what CareCopilot does. We bring that entire network to someone who's taking care of an aging loved one so that they don't need to do the legwork. So if we define a marketplace as bringing multiple resources to someone and making connections, then maybe. But when I think of a marketplace, I think of more like Angie's List
Yeah.
or Poshmark, to which end CareCopilot is not.
Right, right. And then while you were taking a decision as to which idea or which, in fact, let's eliminate idea, but which problem to go after, and the solution that could cater to the problem, why didn't you pick a physical solution? So is that because it was already mature, the market, or what's the reason really?
Yeah, I just didn't see enough evidence to go down that direction.
Right,
So I knew when I left Venmo that I wanted to do something, anything to take the stress out of taking care of aging loved ones.
right,
And I was very open to what that solution looked like. And so I just started meeting with a lot of families who were going through this and then was open to what evolved from that.
right,
And I've spoken with truly hundreds of people who are taking care of aging loved ones at this point, maybe even over 1,000. And that's never been a theme that's come up. There are some families who want to find a senior community for their loved one. And that's usually like one of the top five things that families want help with. But I didn't see a really strong demand for some kind of brick and mortar solution above and beyond the existing adult day centers and senior communities. So yeah, just didn't see the data to go down that direction.
right. Got it. And then, coming back to, since you mentioned, what your caregivers really wanted, you have been a caregiver yourself, and I'm assuming that the direct customer here for Care Copilot is the caregiver rather than the elderly. Um, and so what are the top three things that really matter to a caregiver? What are sort of like the non-negotiables for Care Copilot, and how have they changed now versus when you were a caregiver?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first and say the biggest change that I've seen between what caregivers need today and what caregivers needed, 5+ years ago when I was doing it, is families are increasingly committed to keeping their loved ones at home for as long as possible.
Wow.
And I think that a large part of that is because during COVID, things got really sticky. So there were a lot of cases where families could not see the senior in the senior community because there was a COVID outbreak. And if you visited, you had to take them with you and you couldn't go back. And it just got very messy very quickly. And so I am seeing an increasing number of families who are very committed to keeping the loved one at home for as long as possible and bringing aides into the home instead of
Wow.
moving them to a senior community. So that's my answer to your second question about what's changed. And in terms of what is really top of mind for families today, I can confirm from, all of these families that we've worked with Care Copilot that the top 3 or 4 requests or challenges that families come to us wanting help with are finding a reliable and affordable in-home care aide to come into the home, finding a affordable elder care attorney, ideally one who does free consultations, who can help the family secure the power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and other documentation that families need in order to manage their loved ones' affairs. And then number three is moving or finding a right senior community for a loved one. And we often have families requesting our help finding a great senior community that accepts Medicaid as a form of payment because that's a rarity. And then the fourth usually has something to do with the emotional aspect of caregiving. They either want counseling for the elder adult, a support group for themselves, something in that realm.
Right. I mean, it all sounds very similar to this, cancer-focused company or startup that I was evaluating back in India. And they
Mm.
talked about, hey, there are multiple solutions for folks who actually have cancer. But what about the caregivers? Because caregivers are really having a hard time working. I mean, of course, they want to do the best they can for the cancer patient, but they are not being able to take care of themselves. And how do we support them is a major thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of, guilt and shame wrapped up into caregiving and how to balance their needs versus your own needs as a caregiver. It can be really challenging.
Right. Yeah. And how have the companies that have existed so far and even at CareCopilot, how do you sort of acquire these customers in a more cost-effective way? Because, and I'm just trying to get a sense of like not only the acquisition, but what does the customer life cycle look like, just from a very like CAC to LTV perspective, just to get that sense.
Yeah, so I'll treat those as two separate questions, acquisition and then sort of CAC and LTV. So from an acquisition standpoint, to be honest, neither me nor any company that I've seen in the market has a magic bullet for that. It really comes down to trust and word of mouth. Because, we're not selling $20 t-shirts here. That's pretty low stakes. You're trusting someone to help you navigate what could be the final years of a loved one's life. And so when it comes to something that high stakes, then you really want to make sure that you're getting a recommendation from someone who you know and someone who you trust. And so, the companies in this space, like CareCopilot, that have done well, are companies that really lean into that and lean into partnerships and referrals. Partnerships with healthcare agencies, like discharge nurses who can make referrals. I refer families to attorneys, they refer to me. And so that's a really big part of that acquisition process. I wish there was a magic bullet out there, but it's challenging because people who are taking care of an aging loved one don't even have a single unifying term that they use to describe themselves. The
Sure.
term caregiver is not used by families. They just see themselves as a daughter, a spouse. It's a continuation of their existing relationship, which makes it hard to target via, say, Google Ads. So, yeah, that's my answer in terms of, market acquisition. And in terms of CAC and LTV, it varies widely depending on the nature of the product. But I can say that the average family, where you have a caregiver taking care of an aging loved one, spends about $15,000 a year out of pocket on their loved one's care. So, that's why we have this $750 billion market. And to be honest, I am very confident it's even higher because families tend to not do the best job of itemizing all of the expenses that are going to the loved one. You're not in line at Walmart saying, all right, this is for mom, this is for me. Families don't have time for all of that. And so that $15,000 a year out of pocket is going towards a variety of solutions. And so the CAC and LTV vary depending on whether you're a concierge company like me or if you're just doing in-home care like care.com.
Right. And right now, what all do you have covered? Because there are various, diseases, right? I don't know if that's the right term, but say, for example, there's cancer, there's Alzheimer's. So what do you have at this point at CareCopilot?
Yeah, we support families who are caring for someone with any diagnosis.
Any
So we recently worked with a client who was taking care of her father who suffered from a traumatic brain injury. We are also helping a client who's taking care of her mother who is suffering from some dementia. It
Mm,
really varies, and we are serving families nationwide. The one note that I always mention is that CareCopilot tends to be the most beneficial for families who are caring for someone who's suffering from something degenerative in nature that's likely to last for several years. So,
right.
for example, if you have a mom who's only 60 years old and is otherwise in great health and breaks a hip and needs rehab, but will be fine in 6 months, Care Copilot adds a little bit less value there because that's something you can kind of blitz and figure out. We add a lot more value to someone who maybe has, end stage renal disease or dementia and who will progressively deteriorate, which necessitates this ongoing in-home care, becoming their power of attorney, and more.
Right. And what role does cultural competency really have here? Because I'm guessing that, my mom's response to care would be very different versus, like someone who's even like Southeast Asian, right? I'm a South Asian. Right. So very, very different. So how does that play into the way you design your product, the way you have your team members, and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever anyone signs up for Care Copilot, our first step is to do a 45-minute intake call with them. And in that call, we always ask for granular information about the family's preferred languages, identities, as much as they feel comfortable sharing, so that we can provide those culturally competent resources for them. So, for example, we worked with one family who spoke Korean as a first language, and that family needed speech language pathologists, in-home care aides, physical therapists, occupational therapists. And so we went out of our way to make sure to find Korean speaking specialists for them.
Yeah.
For another client, she's taking care of her mother, and the family happens to be Jewish, and they're looking for a senior community. And the client said, my mom would really feel more comfortable in a community that's, Jewish affirming, Jewish friendly, but we're not too Orthodox. So we don't necessarily want it to be, too heavily Jewish. Her phrase, not mine. And so we always ask those questions so that we can work with families on providing them with resources that match their identity, language, and more.
Right. I think going back to the first question around do you cover all diseases versus specific ones? Did you always start like this, like covering a full span, or did you just get to leveling up with, other diseases? Did you start with one and expand to more?
Yeah, absolutely. So we always started with everything, and that's because it a lot of older individuals as they age tend to get diagnosed with multiple different illnesses at once.
Mm.
And so someone might start with a dementia diagnosis, and then it turns into Alzheimer's, and then they lose their ability to walk. And now we have to manage blood clots in the legs because they can't walk, or different blood pressure issues. And so that's why from the beginning, we didn't pigeonhole ourselves with working with families who have loved ones who have specific ailments. Also, one thing that we found is that often, again, for families who are taking care of someone who has something degenerative, the needs amongst families are pretty similar uh, across diagnoses. So someone who, again, has end-stage renal disease versus Alzheimer's, they tend to both need in-home care. They both need, an elder care attorney. So it just made sense to go ahead and serve everyone from the beginning.
Yeah, it just seems like coordinating for all these diseases would require multiple stakeholders, right? Coordination with multiple stakeholders. So I was actually just reading about PACE, PACE. So what is the role of PACE in the elder care market, and what kind of help do companies like yours and patients actually receive from the federal budgets or programs? And ultimately, like, what is the the kind of improvement that you can see in your financial statements or in your unit economics based on the federal programs?
So you touched on a few things there. So first, the PACE program, for people who don't know, is a federal program where an older adult can receive their health care and other services like adult day services through this program. And they often give you a case manager and provide lots of extra support. So it can be a pretty good program for seniors. To be honest, I have not worked with a lot of families so far that have uh, implemented the PACE program or who have received benefits from PACE, but I'm sure that we will as CareCopilot
Do
progresses.
folks automatically get enrolled to PACE, or do they have to like subscribe to it or something like that?
Yeah, they're not automatically enrolled.
Okay,
So some seniors are in a PACE program and some are not.
okay, got it.
And so CareCopilot does not directly interface or collaborate with PACE programs, nor do we receive any kind of federal funding. But just last year, Medicare did something pretty special that they have not done in the past, which is they decided that they will reimburse providers for training for caregivers and for care coordination services. And
Mm.
so, for the first time ever, providers like myself can actually bill Medicare, straight Medicare, not Medicare Advantage plans, for providing caregiver training or concierge services. Now, this is really hot off the presses, and so it's still a little too early to confirm, what that fee schedule is going to look like and how this is going to play out. But it's a really exciting development because, in a way, it's an acknowledgement from Medicare that of the role that caregivers play in the process of caring for an aging loved one. Medicare really sees the difference in the quality of care when the caregiver is educated and has that care coordination support. So when it comes to funding and billing and PACE programs and everything that's out there, that's the most exciting change that I've seen recently.
Yeah, I also feel that founders or anyone working in the health area needs to be constantly updated when it comes to policies that are launched by the government, because then if you don't keep track, then you're missing out on so much, right? This actually opened up a business opportunity for you, so that's pretty solid.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to keep up, but that's just another one of the things that we do with CareCopilot is educating families about what's new and what's out there that they could take advantage of because life gets busy. It's hard to keep up on all of this stuff. And yeah, we're happy to educate folks.
How do you update yourself? Do you do that personally? Do you have a team, or what does that look like?
What do you mean by update myself in
I
terms
mean,
of different policy changes?
policy changes or just what's going on in the ecosystem, because after having moved to the States, I just feel like there's something going on almost every day.
There is, yeah. I have a lot of newsletters that I'm a part of, a lot of notifications, and to be honest, my network of other professionals who are in this space have been the most value adding because there is not a week that goes by that I don't meet with another professional in this space, usually another founder of an age tech company that fills me in on something that they've heard, and I fill them in on something that I've heard. And in the course of those conversations, it becomes more clear what's relevant and what's pressing and what's timely that should really be on my radar and or the radars of the families that CareCopilot works with.
Got it. Great. Thank you, Alyse. It was really lovely chatting with you. And thank you so much for educating me and, of course, the audience once the audience gets access to the podcast.